jolly, sort of happy.
Oh, happy, yes, I remember that. No, not that I know.
You've never been stung by a bee, have you?
No.
You know, bees are genetically designed to recognise royalty.
Oh, now we know. Now we know. Now we know. Now we know.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the first episode of this new show that I've put on, this new podcast, which is called Now We Know. This is also an extension of this new literary project that I've started in my own time called 𝘋𝘦𝘢𝘵. And I set this thing up a couple of months ago, the original blog, the original project, and obviously when you set this stuff up and set goals to do your own personal creative projects, it's very easy to just start things and then let them slide. But more recently I've had reason to be more active with them because I have paid for a domain name on the blog. So because I've actually paid for something and it just has kicked it up a gear with the effort. I hope it will. I mean, it was recently that I did make a payment, but this is me finally trying to follow through with all of these different failed creative endeavors that I've tried to do over the last couple of years, and I look forward to seeing how this goes, because I do my own individual monologues and soliloquies like this, or I'd get discussions on and talk about a variety of things. Anyone who follows me on Twitter knows that I post a lot about general public issues, whether it's society and politics and economics and that sort of stuff, where my main sort of overall thesis is trying to remain in the post-normie territory, and it's difficult to know when definitely you have been in that territory, and it's important to not be too confident that you are in that territory and that you have crossed the threshold. So it's we'll just see how it goes, and I'll just try my best. And for a first episode of a podcast from me, for anyone who is familiar with the way I am on Twitter, you might be surprised to know what my first topic would be. About a week ago, in fact, a week ago today, I went to see the latest Kenneth Branagh film, starring and directing his second adaptation of an Agatha Christie book, On The Nile. And I hadn't seen a film in the cinema in a couple of months. Last time I'd gone to see Spider-Man over Christmas, but you don't really go to see Spider-Man for have a massive critical eye about it. It's just there for a bit of fun. Some people have described Marvel films; they're more like roller coaster rides. And everyone's quite cynical about Marvel, and I don't mind too much. I could go to probably expand on that in another place, whether that's a blog or another podcast where I talk about Marvel films and how I think they sort of serve a purpose, as it were. Although I would understand the cynicism towards them, but anyway, obviously for all of us, going to the cinema has been a rare occurrence, and just the mere fact that I'd been and seen a new film, even though in general I have a very cynical attitude towards most new films, I just thought it would be an interesting thing to actually give it a review. And whilst it's certainly true that this film is certainly not going to be any kind of artistic groundbreaker, neither was that its intention or its expectation. The execution of what it's trying to do is still worthy in sort of wider discussions about popular art, popular films, because this is clearly supposed to be a popular film rather than some more artistic endeavor like other films are these days, like, I don't know, in the Name of the Dog or whatever it was, that thing, all the stuff that gets loads of nominations at the Oscars. And this is also reflected in Agatha Christie herself. She was a popular writer. She was not, a Jane Austen. She wasn't a George Eliot. She was a popular writer. She sold thousands and thousands of books. We'd finished watching the film, me and my mother, and we clearly both didn't really like it very much. And the fact that the actual theatre we went to was quite deserted, and so that gave us a bit more scope to make some snarky comments about silly things that we were seeing on the screen. We clearly both didn't really like it, and after we got up to leave, we were both talking about it, preliminary thoughts, and the main thing I had to say was it's so sanitized of any historical context. It just seems like it's taking place in an extremely isolated world. And what my mum said to this was, yeah, but that's just Agatha Christie. All of her novels are in quite contextually deserted places. They're quite sanitized of historical context. All of her novels are just there to be quite popular, and her novels are not there to serve some much grander contextual artistic purpose. That's just Agatha Christie. And that was certainly a worthwhile comment, as I've never read any Agatha Christie. I don't really know much about her, and I just obviously she has popular characters, but it would be true to say that she's not a Jane Austen, not a George Eliot. And but I think this film went further than that. It definitely went a bit further to even isolate itself even more from any recognizable world that has ever existed. And I can expand on that later, but I think it does go a bit beyond just the fact that it's Agatha Christie and it's popular art. And that's not to say that popular art should be derided, because popular art serves a significant purpose. It serves as a kind of common cultural element in society that people can get together and enjoy, and it can be an added bonus if it has a lot of critical interest as well as just popular interest, and particularly with whodunit, which is what this is. It's a whodunit. It's quite a basic crime plot, and I have a soft spot for whodunits. I've always liked the idea of it, and become a bit of a cliche, but it's one of these more lovable cliches and more affectionate cliches. I don't know whether it has more of a resonance as a cliche in Britain than in America, or just a sort of artistic staple in Britain than America. But it's something that I have some liking for, this sort of thing. So from the outset, I could have quite liked this film from that starting point. And so we have Kenneth Branagh here, who has already done Murder on the Orient Express, which I haven't seen and I don't really want to. I just remember hearing from my family and my mother, it's not really been well reviewed. It's probably not worth it. And for some reason, she had thought that this one had been better reviewed, or it had had a better reception, and so we decided to both give it the benefit of the doubt. And there is a decent cast. There's obviously Kenneth Branagh is an enjoyable actor, and then you have people like Gal Gadot, Dawn French, Jennifer Saunders, Armie Hammer, Letitia Wright, what's her name? Annette Bening. There are some decent actors in it, and Sophie Okonedo as well. Just from that outset of the cast, it seems like it would be in good hands. But yeah, we'll get back to that. Ken Branagh, despite how we didn't really like the film, Ken Branagh does have it in him for greatness, for good things, because he one of his best recent things was a performance he produced of Shakespeare's Winter's Tale with Judi Dench and Jessie Buckley, which wasn't a film. It was a screened performance on stage that was screened in various cinemas, and probably there's a DVD of it or something. And that was very, very good. That was a couple of years ago, and he does have it in him for good things in this day and age, despite him otherwise doing pretty crap things, like the first Thor film. He did like a crappy crime film with Keira Knightley or something, I think, recently, and he did that Disney live-action adaptation of Cinderella. He directed that. He does have good potential in him despite everything else. But this film here does pertain to the everything else, unfortunately. So from the start of the film, the first suspicious thing about the film is the Poirot origin story. Yes, we get this little, probably 10-minute sequence, which is in black and white before the real film starts, which isn't in black and white, where Poirot is in the trenches in the First World War, and he is shown to be quite strategic or clever and insightful in a particular line of attack in this given circumstance, and he's shown to be quite crafty and cunning, and he's at first treated with suspicion by his commanding officer, but then after this plan, he's suggested that this risky plan has been put into effect, which is successful. The people that doubted him then praise him, congratulate him, and then there's an explosion which damages his face, causes his upper lip to have some lacerations, and then he's seen in this hospital bed, and his fiance or something comes up to the hospital bed and and he's in a very dejected mood about this deformity to his face, and I think the fiance says, grow a moustache, you can hide you can grow a moustache and you can hide it. And so this is basically both an origin story of Poirot and Poirot's moustache. Now, I did a bit of research into the original source material and some other adaptations of the book before I recorded this, and it wouldn't be the most far-fetched thing if there was some original source material with a Poirot backstory, and I don't know if there is one. I don't know if it follows closely with that, but given the trends in cinema today with superheroes and origin stories and superhero origin stories, like you have Cruella, you have that film Pan, which was about Peter Pan, which was like heavily panned by the critics, coincidentally. And you have all these superhero films which have all their origin stories. You have all this stuff, and so it just, even if there is some explicit source material, some explicit authentic source material for Poirot's origin story, it's just difficult to not see this opening bit of the film as part of this new custom in cinema, where you have this obsession with origin stories, this obsession with prequels, this, it's just hard not to disconnect those two things, and I think I'm just quite justified in having that suspicion. So this is the start of the film, and on top of that, there's a Poirot origin story now as opposed to in the bloody first Kenneth Branagh adaptation. I don't know why that's gone on, but whatever. So I don't want to get too much into the plot. So the main thing I wanted to structure this was just picking a few specific characters and a few specific major events in the film, because they were the things that I most want to talk about. There's not much to say about the plot itself because it's just quite basic. So the film is set in 1937 and starts off with Poirot in a jazz club where you get two of the main characters, Jackie and Simon. Simon is played by Armie Hammer. And then Gal Gadot's character is introduced to... Gal Gadot's character is a friend of Jackie, and she's introduced to Simon, who's Armie Hammer's character. And there's a sort of implication that Simon and Gal Gadot's character have, fallen for each other a little bit. And then there's a time skip, and turns out that Gal Gadot's character and Simon, Armie Hammer, have got together. And they, along with Poirot and all this other assortment of characters, have all booked a place on this luxury cruise on the River Nile. And also included is Jackie, who has decided to tag along, and she's clearly full of full of pain for the loss of her love and betrayal, and of course she would be a prime suspect. You know, you could just see from the outset that she would be a bit of a prime suspect if any murder took place. And so they're all on this cruise, and the classic whodunit tropes just, they go on to autopilot in a way. And not that that's fundamentally a bad thing, as I said, leading back to what I was talking about popular art. But then, it goes through the motions, and then in the end, the real killer is announced, and the people that are still alive then leave the cruise, and then they, go back to their lives feeling a bit shaken, whatever. So there's not really much to say about the plot. But the main thing that needed to be said was just going back to the way that it was sanitized of historical context. Yes, it's true that Agatha Christie novels, given that they're supposed to be just quite simple sources of entertainment, but this seemed to go further than that, and it was just the very modern framing of the film. There's characters that are African American that clearly weren't in the source material, and then there are some characters that are lesbians that were obviously not in Agatha Christie, because at the time she was writing, the modern idea of sexuality just didn't exist at all. So it'd be ridiculous to frame it that way. And there's obviously just talk of racism and prejudice or whatever the hell it is, and it's just hard to see how anyone would enjoy this film more than one viewing. It's just hard to see the film as having any staying power whatsoever, regardless of it being just a popular film. And lots of popular films have great staying power, and this is just so immediate and so very much caught up in the time period of today, of the 21st century, or this particular part of the 21st century, where these particular social issues are more contentious than they were 10, 20 years ago. So I have a few case studies. So you have the character of Mrs. Salome Otterborn, who was originally written as a romance writer, just a romance novel writer, and in a previous adaptation she'd be played by Angela Lansbury. But in this film, she's a black American jazz singer played by Sophie Okonedo, and there's a scene where the character is talking about the racism she's, experienced from white ladies, and I mean, obviously, there's no conceivable way that something written around the time of Agatha Christie would, deal with issues of racism. But obviously, Agatha Christie is British, and it's just so blatantly phoned in to please a certain, modern sensibility. It's just so blatant. And on top of that, in the original source material, we have Rosalie, who was in the original source material, she's Mrs. Otterborn's daughter, and also she was just a kind of sulky, spoilt girl. But in this version, she's Mrs. Otterborn's niece, and she's also her business manager, as opposed to just some, familial dependent. And she's played by Letitia Wright. So, I mean, I don't need to say how obvious that is to try and also appeal to modern sensibilities, but it's also how Sophie Okonedo is British, and Letitia Wright is British. She's from Guyana, I think, but she's British, and so the two of them trying to do American accents, and they are not great. Definitely Ken Branagh could have forked out a little bit more to get some real black American actresses to do these parts, but I don't know why. I don't know why, 'cause the accents are clearly quite poor. And I've seen Sophie Okonedo in some other things. She was in Hotel Rwanda, she was in Doctor Who, and she was in another film I saw recently. And you have Letitia Wright, who I have a bit of admiration for, because she's my anti-vax queen. I mean, not really. She just posted one thing on social media, and then obviously that all blew up, and obviously it's contentious with her being this big name in the Marvel films, in Black Panther, which every other liberal normie actor in Marvel denounced her quickly, even though she's kept her place. But yeah, she had some vaccine controversy, and her performance in Black Panther itself, or in the Marvel films, is is good, despite the overall films being, overall a bit more lacking in quality. But her individual performances, I often look back on not too badly. And so this is just the first main thing to say about how, this isn't just some organic additional adaptation of this book for your pleasure. It is making a point. It's going out of its way to join in the customs of the day in terms of social issues. And it's so blatant that it should be considered a form of breaking the fourth wall, I think. And I thought about that because I've not seen the Batman, but one thing I've heard about, there is a line in the film where somebody says, rich white man or something like that. And there'd been no such line like that in any other Batman film post uh, post Tim Burton. There's there's no other reason for a Batman film to have that line other than, joining in with the customary social issues of the day. And it's so blatant that it's like breaking the fourth wall. They may as well have looked at the camera and addressed the audience. That's what it should be considered, a form of breaking the fourth wall. And I now move to another very depressing example of all this, which was Jennifer Saunders and Dawn French. My God. So I really love French and Saunders, the original series. It's like Star Trek. The original series where they just had, their sketches, their parodies, their satires, which they continued to do every so often to this day. They did a very, very funny recent one of the Mamma Mia sequel, which was very refreshing to see that they still had it. They still, Jennifer Saunders still had it in her for, hard hitting satire. It was very good to see. And originally in the 90s and the 2000s, that it was some of the highest quality satire and parody, and up there in terms of sketch comedy that there ever is. And sadly their main material has been more forgotten about, just generally by the mainstream, and it needs to be more appreciated. There are some fantastic parodies they did of Silence of the Lambs, of there was one of Cold Mountain, there was one of Harry Potter, there was one of the original Mamma Mia film. They were extremely funny, extremely funny. But now you have these two characters that they're playing. So Saunders plays a character called Marie van Schloya. I think that's how you pronounce her name. And in the original source material, she's an American socialite, and in a previous adaptation, she'd be played by Betty Davis. But in this adaptation, she is an American socialite turned communist, and it's hard to explain without seeing the film because it's so baffling. The main reason why this doesn't work from the outset is that socialite characters, particularly in this whodunit crime drama setting, are supposed to be sort of whimsical and camp and entertaining and funny. And this, for whatever reason, they've put in this whole communist thing. Them trying to sort of bridge the gap between her now being a communist but also still being a kind of whimsical camp socialite. They can't bridge this gap very well. The bridge is always collapsing. It just doesn't really work. It's also just a very wasted usage of Saunders as such a great comedic actress as she is. And it's so depressing to see her reduced to this sort of stuff. But in the original source material, Van Schreier is a kleptomaniac. And in this adaptation, she's not a kleptomaniac. And I think this particular thing goes to show why they're making the effort not to have this as just a straight up, primarily entertaining whodunit, primarily entertaining crime drama, because they're putting in the communist thing in exchange for the kleptomaniac thing. It would have been perfectly fine to have her a kleptomaniac or create some humor around that. The communist thing, I don't really understand what they're trying to do, because the film is quite clear that it's not trying to endorse her character or even be indifferent to her character as a communist, because there's a line that Poirot has where he calls her ideas your economic fairy tales. So even Poirot calls her out, and Ken Branagh's character, Ken Branagh, the man who's in charge of all this, calls her out. So the film is clear that it's not indifferent, and it is negatively predisposed to the idea of communism. But if that's the case, what is the point of it? Because it's not funny. It's just really unpleasant. I mean, this is 1937, and what is the point of this? It's not funny, and it's less funny than if she was just straight up a kleptomaniac. But they didn't want to use just simple, entertaining devices. They had to do this weird thing that probably in some way reflects the sensibilities of the times we are in now, the communist thing. Even if they're denouncing communism, it's just weird. It doesn't work. When it comes to Dawn French's character, she plays Miss Bowers, who is Marie van Schleier's nurse, and in an original adaptation she was played by Maggie Smith. And the thing about Miss Bowers is that it is eventually revealed when they are doing interviews with all the guests as to the circumstances of the murder that Miss Bowers is in love with Marie van Schleier, who's Saunders' character. So Jennifer Saunders and Dawn French are seriously playing, lesbians. And for anybody that has got any familiarity with their usual comedic material, you would just find it ridiculous that they would be part of this thing, which at any other time they would be quite easily doing parodies of. Because there's one running gag in the original French and Saunders sketch show where if there's some scene and there's some implication that one character is being too affectionate with another, either French's character or Saunders' character will say, "Don't get funny." It's a common line. Don't get funny. Don't get funny, regardless of what the character is or the context. So this is just this thing here with these two lesbian characters in Death on the Nile. It's just like a perfect place for the don't get funny. It's a perfect don't get funny moment. But they're being deadly serious. And it's just so depressing to see them reduced to this. And not everyone will be this depressed if they're not so familiar with the full works of French and Saunders, which I thoroughly recommend everyone check out, especially the films I mentioned before that they had parodies of. And regardless of how much they might still got it to do good content, good parodies, they recently did a 30-year anniversary special a couple of years ago, and then they've, as I mentioned, the Mamma Mia sequel one they did in 2018. That was when that was. And they've just done this, and it's... I mean, obviously this film is going to be completely forgotten down the line, so it will not really tarnish. In the grand scheme of things, it won't tarnish their full body of work, but it is depressing to actually be there in the cinema when it is at its most pronounced, where this low point of their career is most pronounced. And I just can't wait for it to dissipate. Anyway, a few more things I've got to say about the film, which I thought were worth saying. There was Russell Brand's character. I didn't mention this earlier because I basically forgot, but Russell Brand is in this film, and he's playing a kind of aristocratic physician, and he's obviously got quite tidy hair and tidy facial hair, and he's, that none of his tattoos are visible. None of the usual sort of grimy physicalities about Russell Brand, the person, are made aware in this character. And of course, he tries to put on this particular received pronunciation accent. But it doesn't work, because I just don't believe it. Russell Brand is Russell Brand. He's done all this crazy shit all throughout his life as a public figure, as an actor, as a comedian. He's developed this greasy, grimy, crazy-haired, unrefined ambience about him, and then he's just trying to reverse all of that and put on this very suave performance that tries to be the complete opposite of everything that is just preceding him, everything that is coming before him. and it's just not believable. He's not a bad actor in the film. He's not a bad actor, and if someone saw this film and had never heard of Russell Brand, it would probably be okay. But obviously, most people have heard of Russell Brand, and it just doesn't work. They just could have got, but they could have at least got someone who doesn't have the disposition that Brand does. It just doesn't work. It's a gimmicky. It's a novelty. It doesn't work, and it's just another aspect in why this film is just so whimsical in its execution, and going to be so unsuccessful in the long run in its legacy. There's also a lot to be said about the sets, which quite obviously, there's a lot of green screen. There's a lot of digital aid in creating these settings, and it doesn't really work. It's kind of like Uncanny Valley, but with just backdrops. If it was just a more primitive technology for putting in a background, then it would actually work better than what we have here. It just looks a lot like a video game, and if I was playing a video game, I wouldn't mind, but for some reason, because I'm not playing a video game, but it looks like a video game background, it doesn't work. It doesn't really work. There are some scenes with some pyramids, of course, which also look kind of fake, and it just probably would have worked better or just been more palatable with a more primitive background technology. It's an uncanny valley of backgrounds. Yeah. I couldn't help but just compare the overall aesthetic of the film with something like Jewel in the Crown, where there is this explicitly colonial context in the film, and this one is trying to maintain the appeal of a colonial context, but just completely sanitized of any possible controversy, because obviously colonial connotations are extremely controversial today, and this film is being extremely careful with working within the acceptable parameters of the year of our Lord 2022. And as I've said many times, it doesn't work. They have failed to try and work within the parameters, but also give a successful, entertaining film. They've just not succeeded. And another noticeable thing about the film is that nobody's smoking. Nobody's smoking at all. It would be astonishing if nobody in this particular setting, as it was originally written, would be not smoking. And I just suspect that this was something to get the 12A rating in order to just have it more wider distributed. The 12A being a particularly UK-based certification, which means people 12 or under have to have an adult accompanied with them. I don't know what the equivalent is in America, but yeah, no one's smoking, and this just continues with the whole idea of this thing being so sanitized of historical context, because the smoking would pertain to historical context, and this is just another modern framing where there's more stigmatization of smoking, and just to pander to modern sensibilities and modern framings of it's just bad. It's not a little thing, but it is a significant thing that no one's smoking. It's God. There were a few good things about the film. Annette Bening was quite good. She played just quite a straightforward character. Gal Gadot was also good. I mean, obviously she's just incredibly beautiful, and so she's just perfect for this kind of role. Physically, she's so good for the role, but she's not suited for this what is supposed to be a more whimsical, campy murder mystery. She's just not suited to that. As her background before now was as Wonder Woman, and her overall acting is just quite wooden. And with Wonder Woman, obviously, you can get away with it more because wooden acting can be, reframed as stoic, which just works better for Wonder Woman. But it doesn't work here. It's supposed to be more lively and animated, and this doesn't work. One thing about Armie Hammer, though, is that he actually does an exceedingly good English accent. And I didn't really know much about Armie Hammer before now. I'd not really seen his films, and obviously I'd heard about the controversy with him being a cannibal or something. But I didn't actually know whether he was American or English, and I learned later that he was American. So that is something that is surprisingly good, because usually it's the American actors that do bad British accents, but vice versa is much better. I mean, you have people like Hugh Laurie, Benedict Cumberbatch, Rosamund Pike, who often do very acclaimed American accents, and often the other way around. It's just far less common to get an acclaimed American performance of an English accent. And this whole film just kind of reversed that whole thing, because you have, Letitia Wright and Sophie Okonedo doing these quite pitiful American accents, and then you just have Armie Hammer coming in and just being very, very natural about it. So that was a kind of more intriguing thing about the film. But in general, yeah, it's just one of these run-of-the-mill films that misunderstands the true purpose of its source material, going beyond its realistic boundaries. What are those realistic boundaries? Well, it's supposed to be just a purely entertaining whodunit that's for as wide a popular appeal as possible, and not in a bad way, because obviously popular art serves a purpose as a kind of cultural common point of interest that brings people together. And this shifts its main primary purpose to making a point. And not only is it very irritating and grating in the ways that it does try to prove a point, it's just not at all what the intended purpose of the source material was. And it's like putting diesel into a petrol engine of a car. That's what it really is. I mean, it had some good costumes, some good set designs, other than well, actually, no, it didn't. No. A lot of the set designs looked like they were just sort of the sort of things you'd get in these particular high street furniture shops, where everything is very geometric and very flashy, and lots of glass and squares and big panels, and even that looked not believable as some sort of interior design from that era. Not even that was believable. And it's just not going to be remembered at all. People would much rather go to the other. I haven't actually seen any of the other adaptations, and I am likely to check them out if there are them that have, Angela Lansbury, Betty Davis, Maggie Smith. I don't know if they're all in the same one, but they have been in it before. I think people would just be rather yearning to watch that, or things similar to Jewel in the Crown, either if they want some sort of historical colonial setting, or if they just want something that's purely entertaining, something that is more respectful of the essence of the source material. This is just stupid, and it's not going to last. And I was talking with my mum about this, and the thing she said was that these people just want to make money. And I could understand that, because, I mean, obviously, with popular art, as the Agatha Christie books would be, there is a greater proportion of the motivations come from making money than your average piece of art. And with this film, that proportion is even greater than it would be in the source material from Agatha Christie for just making money. But I find that as just a pure or absolute predominant explanation for films like this, I find that a bit insufficient. I don't believe that people can only ever be completely motivated by money, particularly with a film like this, because clearly there was lots of effort going into the precision of, I don't know, the sets or the costumes. There was clearly effort and heart that went into this, but it's insecure. It's fundamentally insecure about the fact that it wants to very much appeal to the sentiments of the times. And these sentiments, which have cropped up very fast in the past 5 or 6 years, sentiments that have cropped up enough to, affect films and affect the way that films are written, the dialogue in films is written. And it'll probably change in the next 5 or 6 years. It'll probably be different then. Well, I don't know. Well, how can you really know? Maybe we thought it would be gone by now when it first cropped up. This, wokeism, as it were. And I don't use that word lightly because it's a bit cringe and a bit boomer. But yeah, it's just insecure, very short-sighted, and I wouldn't recommend it. I didn't have an active dislike for the film. I didn't have an active resentment of the film. It's just an eye roll, and it was a waste of time because the same effort that would go into an eye roll if I was to pass by some sort of billboard where there's something about, if there's some advert for some big brand that has some mention of diversity in it or something. The effort that would go into an eye roll of me just passing a billboard on the street like that is the same effort I put into an eye roll for this film. Hence, it is just a waste of time, and I don't really think you're missing anything. And oh yeah, the one final thing that is just quite depressing is that Ridley Scott was a producer on this film. Ridley Scott, the same man who has always tended to be a bit more of a subvertive force in, the way films are made at a given time. He's one of the few directors that has said something explicitly anti-superhero film. And then for him to come along for this, it's just even more peculiar. It's peculiar, not worth watching, waste of time, insecure. So why am I even talking about this? Well, why am I even talking about this? I guess the main reason was that I did want to genuinely sing praises more of alternative things that would be better to watch. Even if I do know that for sure or don't, whether that's the old adaptations, which I can just guarantee are going to be better, and to sing praises of French and Saunders, and how this is a complete bastardization of what their true skills really are. They're bastardizing their own original content with this, this pandering in the same way that this is a bastardization of Agatha Christie's source material. And I just know it is even if I haven't read the source material. Yeah, so that's all I've got to say about this, and I'm curious as to see whether Branagh goes down this same route or what he's got next in store, whether he's going to go back to Marvel, when he's going to go back to Shakespeare, or whatever he's going to do. It'll be a while, I think, before we get something really decent out of him. And he's a good actor. He was a good performer, and he had a good costume in this, but he panders, and yeah. So I'll leave it there, and I will hopefully see you next time. Thank you very much for listening if you did, and yeah, goodbye.
I am Darius Grouch the Third, the Rumble, and I am taking down the money plane. Now bring me my money.
Please hold on.
Oh yeah.